Why is a movie that is over 30 years old still at the top of so many people's must-watch list? I'm Eddie, and today we're going to find out. And to find out, we need to start with the man who made it. Before we talk about Heat specifically, you need to understand something about Michael Mann as a filmmaker. Mann does not make movies about ordinary people. Every single film in his catalog is about someone who is the absolute best at what they do. If you look at a film like Collateral, Tom Cruise plays a hitman so precise, so controlled, he's basically a force of nature. But here's what most people miss. Jamie Foxx, as the cab driver, is also the best in town at his respective job. That tension between two professionals is the entire film. Ali, need I say more? He's the greatest of all time. Then we have Miami Vice. We have Crockett and Tubbs. They're not cops. They're artists operating at the highest level of their craft. Michael Mann is obsessed with mastery, with what it costs and what it takes away from you. And the movie Heat is the pinnacle of this obsession. Our two main characters are Neil McCauley and Vincent Hanna. Neil McCauley is played by Robert De Niro and Vincent Hanna is played by Al Pacino. Fun fact, this was the first time these two acting juggernauts were actually ever on screen together, but more on that later. Neil McCauley is not a thief. That'd be like saying Michael Jordan played ball once or twice in his life. Neil is a specialist, an architect of precision, and his counterpart is Vincent Hanna. He's exactly the same, just wearing a badge. These two men are almost solely driven by one thing, their work. It's best described in the most iconic line of the whole picture.
Remember Jimmy McElwain on the yard used to say, you want to be making moves on the street, have no attachments, allow nothing to be in your life that you cannot walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner.
This single line of dialogue shows you the inner Bushido-level code of Neil, who's the criminal, but it applies just as much to Vincent, who's the cop. It's yin and yang, two sides of the same coin. It's the best thief in Los Angeles versus the best cop in Los Angeles. Mann put them in the same city, and he let the games begin. The movie Heat opens with a heist, and not just any heist. It's a precision armored car robbery that tells you everything you need to know about Neil McCauley in the first 10 minutes of the picture. There's no wasted movements, no unnecessary violence. Every man in the crew knows their role. Every second's accounted for because this is not a robbery, it's a military-style operation. Except one of Neil's crew is a man named Waingro, someone who's not part of their regular team, and this guy can't help himself. During the robbery, he pistol whips a guard and then ends up killing the same guard. Then Neil makes the calculated decision to execute the remaining guards because dead men tell no tales. In one moment of undisciplined stupidity, Waingro has turned a clean job into a triple homicide, and Neil's world will never be the same again. This sets in motion two things simultaneously. Number one, Vincent Hanna catches the case. And from the moment he crouches over those bodies, he knows that this crime is not random, it's professional. This is someone operating on a completely different level. Vincent is already obsessed before he even knows Neil's name. And Neil now has a loose end walking around the streets of Los Angeles. A man like Neil does not leave loose ends unresolved. Waingro has to go, except Waingro disappears. While Neil is planning his next move, Vincent is building this picture in his mind, using surveillance, informants, as well as patience. Two worlds are circling each other like planets dancing through space, close enough to feel the gravity, but not yet close enough to collide. Then we have the job of a lifetime, the one caper that all criminals dream of, the one big score, enough to disappear into the ether, never to be seen again. And in this film, it's a bank job, in broad daylight in downtown Los Angeles. Vincent knows there's a big job coming, Neil knows that Vincent knows there's a big job coming, and Neil proceeds with the plan anyway, because Neil McCauley does not operate from fear. Vincent finds out about the specifics of the bank job only a few minutes before it actually begins. He only arrives in time to set up a perimeter around the bank itself, but he doesn't arrive in time to stop the robbery. What follows is one of the greatest action sequences ever committed to film. This takes us to the downtown LA shootout. 6 minutes of controlled chaos that feels more real than any action sequence before, or dare I say since. Mann filmed it with actual military veterans. The tactics are real, the sound design is real, and when those rifles go off in the concrete jungle that is LA, you feel it in your chest. We're going to spend some more time on that sequence when we get to the craft section of the video, because what Mann did visually in those 6 minutes changed action filmmaking forever. Between the first heist and the bank job, something happens that nobody expected. Vincent and Neil actually meet. Not in an interrogation room, not at a crime scene, but over coffee. Vincent has spent weeks surveilling Neil, and Neil has also returned the favor, knowing your enemy and all that stuff. Even though this is a relationship that feels likely to end in bloodshed, the two men sit down at a table at a diner and talk, like two professionals who've earned each other's respect. This scene is one of the key reasons Heat is still so loved by audiences some 30 years after it was released. Two of the greatest actors who ever lived. The first time sharing screen together. No guns, no backup, just two fellas having a chat. Neil tells Vincent that if it comes to it, he will not hesitate to put him down. Vincent tells Neil he will not hesitate either. It's an amazingly touching and sobering moment in the picture, as both men share tales of their home lives, the dreams they have every night, and then they end up showing each other their teeth, like two alpha dogs meeting in the wilderness and letting each other know, I would kill you if I had to, but for now, let's chill. And then the two men just finish their coffee and end up smiling at each other. We'll unpack every frame of that scene when we get to the performances section of the video, because what De Niro and Pacino did in only a few minutes sitting at a coffee shop is what acting is supposed to be. Everything after the scene at the coffee shop feels inevitable. Events are pushed forth by their own forward momentum. Neil starts a relationship with a woman named Edie. She's quiet, she is real, she's everything his life is not. And for the first time, Neil McCauley has something worth living for beyond the next job. After the bank job is finished, Neil finds a way out of Los Angeles. He has Edie, he has enough money for 5 lifetimes, and he has a clear exit. They're home free. But Neil finds out where Waingro is. Most men would leave town with the money and the girl. But Neil, no matter what you think about him or criminals in general, is a man of deep principle. This is why I referenced Bushido earlier. Had his circumstances been different, Neil McCauley would have been at the top of whatever field he'd chosen. But this is not where we find ourselves. His code will not allow him to leave this unfinished. Not for pride, not for ego, but because it simply is what must be done. That decision, that one turn of the steering wheel, is what separates Heat from every other crime film ever made. Neil McCauley chooses who he is over who he could have been. Neil does manage to take out Waingro, but at a massive cost. Vincent has police officers watching Waingro in a hotel, and the moment Waingro is sent to meet his maker, Vincent goes after Neil. Just as Neil is about to get in the car with Edie and drive off into the proverbial sunset, he sees Vincent off in the distance. He knows, and then with no words needed, we hear that earlier line ring like church bells on a Sunday morning. Don't let yourself get attached to anything you're not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner. Neil leaves Edie because Neil was always going to leave Edie. We then have a final shootout between Neil and Vincent, two samurai who've been destined to fight since birth, finally meeting on the field of battle. When we're looking at the performances, we have to step back for a minute and just marvel that Heat is one of the greatest ensemble cast ever assembled for a single film. And that's not me trying to be some kind of hype man. Before we get to Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, let's talk about the supporting cast, because Mann did something remarkable here. He took every single role, no matter how small, and cast it with someone who you could not only believe completely, but also someone who had a lasting impact on the story. We're going to kick off with Jon Voight, who played Nate. Nate is one of the most fascinating characters in the entire film, because he exists completely outside the world of both cops and criminals. Nate acts as Neil's fixer. He's an advisor, he's almost like a therapist, and Jon Voight plays him like a wise old consigliere, a man who's seen everything and judges nothing. But what makes Nate truly unique is he also finds Neil work. He connects him with the right people, negotiates the right deals. In any other film, Nate would be a minor character. But Jon Voight plays him with such warmth and a kind of a quiet wisdom that every scene he shares with De Niro feels like a conversation between two men who've known each other for over 30 years. Half like a wise old mentor, and half kind of like a sports agent who's trying to help his star athlete decide on who he's going to play for in the next season. It's a beautiful and completely original character in the crime genre. Then we have Tom Sizemore, who played Michael Chirito. This is Neil's right hand, a family man who loves being a thief. Sizemore plays him with such warmth and normality that you generally forget what he does for a living. There's a scene where Chirito and the crew are having a fancy dinner, and the way he kisses his wife, the way he jokes around with his children. Tom Sizemore makes that contradiction completely believable. Val Kilmer as Chris Shaharless. Kilmer brings something almost reckless to Chris, a man who is brilliant at the job but can't stay out of his own way. His relationship with his wife Charlene is one of the most underrated subplots in the entire picture. Two people who love each other completely and are absolutely destroying each other simultaneously. Kilmer plays every scene with this barely contained energy, like a sports car with bad brakes. He's electric from start to finish, and because of the boundless love for his wife, it's nearly impossible not to have empathy for this man. Now, speaking of the wife, Ashley Judd does not have a huge amount of screen time in the movie Heat, but she has one moment, a single moment that is worth the price of admission alone. Charlene is at a window, police are watching her as they know her husband Chris is coming to meet her. Her job is to produce a single signal from the balcony so he walks into the trap, this one signal, and she walks away clean. She's got about 3 seconds to make the choice. And what Ashley Judd does with her hand in that moment, without a single word of dialogue, is one of the greatest pieces of acting in the entire film. A wife, a mother, a woman who has been destroyed by loving this man, making the most important decision of her life with a single gesture. That is show, don't tell at its absolute finest. We're going to come back to that moment in the craft section because Mann's direction in that scene is as important as Judd's performance. Ted Levine as Bosco. This is Vincent's partner, the calm in the storm next to Pacino's hurricane. Levine is one of those actors who makes every scene feel grounded and real. You probably know him as Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, but in Heat, he's the complete opposite. He's steady, he's warm, he's reliable. That contrast shows you his range completely, and his big old mustache is badass. William Fichtner as Roger Van Zant. This guy plays an investment banker, the man who sets the entire story in motion by not only not paying Neil's crew for the armored car robbery, but also having them murdered. Fichtner only has about 50 minutes of screen time in total, but he uses every single second. There's a coldness to Van Sant that is genuinely unsettling. A businessman who orders murders the way most people order lunch. Fichtner never chews the scenery, he just makes your skin crawl. And then there's the young Natalie Portman. She was only about 15, 16 years old when Heat was actually filmed. She plays Lauren, which is Vincent Hanna's troubled stepdaughter. She only has a few scenes in the entire picture, but one of those scenes is in a bathroom, and it's probably the most emotionally raw moment in the entire picture. Mann trusted a teenager with one of the heaviest scenes in a 3-hour crime epic, and she delivered completely. When you watch that scene knowing what Natalie Portman would go on to become, it's not surprising at all. The talent was always there. Okay, so on to the main event, Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. Let's start with the elephant in the room, that these two men had appeared in the same film before, which is The Godfather Part 2, where De Niro played a young Vito Corleone and Pacino played his son Michael. But they had 0 screen time as they were on different timelines and they never were in the same room together. However, Heat managed to fix all that. And Michael Mann, who'd spent 15 years developing the story, knew exactly what he had. Two of the greatest actors who'd ever lived, finally together in the same frame. The question was, how do you use that? Mann's answer was genius. He does not play it for a spectacle. He does not make a big deal about it. He just puts them in a diner and lets them be two tired professionals talking to one another. And it's that restraint which makes this the greatest scene in the picture. De Niro as Neil McCauley is one of the great minimalist performances in cinema history. Neil does not waste words, Neil does not waste movements. De Niro disappears so completely into the man's discipline and control that you forget you're watching acting. Every silence Neil holds tells you more than most actors could convey with a monologue. Watch his eyes throughout the film. De Niro is always thinking, he's always calculating, even when he appears completely still. But it's in the quiet moments where De Niro truly breaks your heart. The scene where Neil walks through his empty house before the final job, No furniture, no personal items, just a place to sleep. It's not really a home. De Niro says nothing because he doesn't need to, but what you feel is 30 years of being alone in only 30 seconds of screen time. And then there is Mr. Pacino. So Al Pacino as Vincent Hanna is the other side of the coin entirely. Where De Niro is still water running deep, Pacino is straight fire. Vincent Hanna operates at a frequency that most human beings cannot maintain. He's always on, he's always hunting, he's always burning. Pacino makes a choice that lesser actors would not have the courage to make. He plays Vincent at the absolute limit of acceptable human behavior in almost every scene in the movie. There are moments where you think this man is genuinely unwell. His obsession has consumed everything, he's had 3 marriages, a whole bunch of relationships, he barely even sleeps. And then there's the rumor, widely discussed amongst film people, that Mann told Pacino his character was chipping throughout the duration of the picture. For those of you who don't know, chipping means using cocaine regularly, but in very small amounts, just enough to stay on the edge, just enough to never fully come down. Now, whether Mann actually said this or not, if you watch Pacino's performance again with that in your head, it does fit perfectly. And then comes the coffee shop scene. These 2 men sit across from each other, and something remarkable happens. They both relax. For the first and only time in the film, both of these men exhale, because they're finally talking to the only other person on Earth who truly understands them. Almost like 2 soldiers who never served together in combat, but both saw their fair share of violence in the wars. And now, the only person who can understand them is the man sitting directly across the table. Watch how De Niro holds his coffee cup. Watch how Pacino leans forward. Watch the moment, and there is a specific moment where both men smile almost simultaneously because they recognize each other completely. And at the risk of sounding like a hippie, this is the moment where they look into each other's souls. Neil tells Vincent he won't hesitate to put him down if it comes to it. Vincent says the same. And both men mean it absolutely. But in those 2 statements, there are 2 human beings who in another life could have been the closest of friends, guys who played golf together on the weekends, 2 men who chose mastery over everything else and are quietly, privately paying the price for that choice. That is what De Niro and Pacino do in all of 6 minutes and 16 seconds. They make you feel the entire weight of 2 lifetimes of sacrifice over a cup of coffee, and there has never been anything quite like it in cinema before or since. Now to the craft, looking at the directing, cinematography, and the vibe of the overall picture. One thing that many great directors do is they'll make a city or landscape a character in the movie. Mann does this in a way with LA that few directors are able to. I grew up in New York, so I'm no stranger to big cities, but Los Angeles always felt more impersonal to me. Not just compared to New York, but to many other metropolises that I've actually been to. I think Mann captures this in the best way possible, showing a large, busy place, but also a feeling of emptiness and a kind of perpetual level of disconnection. The big freeways, large neighborhoods, and large skyscrapers are clearly full of people, but is there actually any humanity there? Let's have a look at a scene in the film which probably hasn't been the most reviewed in the picture, but clearly shows what Michael Mann was driving at. In this particular scene, Neil's whole crew and their families are having dinner together. We touched on this scene earlier when talking about Tom Sizemore. Now let's look at it through a different lens. Right off the bat, it's shocking as it's basically a company dinner. Just these men who don't have 401ks or pension plans, but are world-class criminals, but they love their wives and they love their kids, and they're loyal as can be to one another. There's even a great line when Tom Sizemore gives his wife a gift. The wife is as emotional and happy as can be. And De Niro, in a lighthearted and amusing way, says, "Just don't ask him where he got it." Everybody laughs, but now we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that everyone's wives are aware of what their husbands do for a living. And at that particular moment of the film, it kind of seems to be no big deal. In this scene, the men and their families are at a busy restaurant. But the way Michael Mann and his cinematographer Dante Spinotti shot the scene, you can barely see the faces or any other important characteristics of anyone else in the restaurant. Now naturally, part of this is a stylistic choice. In a scene like this, it makes sense to shoot with a shallow depth of field as you're focusing on your characters. but it almost feels like the rest of the restaurant doesn't matter. As a comparison, if you have a look at this scene from Goodfellas, this is one of the most famous in cinematic history. You can see here the director Martin Scorsese and his cameraman Michael Ballhaus are clearly focusing on Ray Liotta and Joe Pesci and the rest of the gangsters and their crew. But you're also well aware of the other patrons in the restaurant, almost like the characters in Goodfellas live in a community. But in Heat, they don't. I know this may feel like a lot of attention placed on a 60-second dinner scene, but this is where we see the level of attention to detail in this film. My father, who was a director and editor, used to say, this was a movie that was made with care. And this is the moment to talk about the man behind the camera, Dante Spinotti, an Italian cinematographer who Mann would go on to use repeatedly throughout his career. Last of the Mohicans, The Insider, and of course, Heat. It's not hard to understand why Mann continued to collaborate with Dante. Spinotti has a gift that very few cinematographers possess. He has the ability to make darkness feel alive. Most DPs light a scene to eliminate shadow. Spinotti does the opposite. He uses shadow as a storytelling tool. Every dark corner in Heat feels intentional. Every pull of light feels earned. As a cameraman myself, I can tell you that this is genuinely difficult to achieve consistently across a 3-hour film. What Spinotti and Mann created together is a visual language that's completely unique to this film. You could take any single frame of Heat, put it on a wall, and you'd be looking at a photograph. That's the hallmark of a truly great cinematographer working with a truly great director. The disconnected landscape continues for the rest of the film. Here, when Vincent goes to see his CI, or confidential informant, here when Neil is being briefed on the bank job, even the scene when he first has a drink with Edie at her house overlooking LA. And speaking of that scene with Edie, here's a piece of film trivia that you will appreciate. That stunning Los Angeles skyline twinkling behind Neil and Edie on the balcony is not entirely what it appears to be. Mann and Spinotti faced a problem that any cinematographer who has shot night exteriors will recognize immediately. Film stock in 1995 simply could not simultaneously expose correctly for the actors' faces and capture the depth and detail of a city lit up at night behind them. The technology just didn't exist yet. What was Mann's solution? Well, he shot the actors separately and then used a digital composite of the cityscape behind them in post-production. This is one of the earliest uses of digital compositing in a major Hollywood film. Here's why that matters. Mann is so committed to that specific image he saw in his head that the exact feeling of two people suspended above a cold and indifferent city, that he pioneered a technique to achieve it rather than compromise on the shot. That obsession with the image is what separates Michael Mann from almost every other director working in Hollywood at the time. And that specific frustration, not being able to capture a night cityscape on film, is what drove him to be one of the first major directors to fully embrace digital cinematography on his film Collateral. Even the limitations of his tools became a doorway to something new. This brings us to another style choice that is also a skill set of Michael Mann. The SOB can shoot at night like no one else. The shooting at night, whether it be in Thief, Collateral, Miami Vice, even Last of the Mohicans, and of course Heat, gives us another window into the world of the characters. I'm sure your grandmother or some other old wise person once told you, no good decisions are made after 2 a.m. Well, when you have a movie where a good portion, if not all of it, is filmed after sundown, we know there's going to be some trouble in the near future. Filming at night, especially in a city like Los Angeles, makes everything feel a bit more on edge, a bit more primal, like the predators have come out to feed. With the extraordinary craftsmanship of Dante Spinotti, all the night scenes have a sort of 1930s film noir gangster vibe, kind of feeling like James Cagney could just appear on screen at any moment. Looking at it now, it blows the mind of how good this film actually looks, especially considering that it was shot on actual film stock. Nowadays we take for granted how digital cameras have made it so much easier to film at night. Okay, the scene of scenes, the shootout. As I mentioned at the top of the video, Michael Mann makes movies about people who are the best of the best at what they do. The shootout scene does not deviate from this path whatsoever. Neil, Chris, and Michael have successfully robbed the bank they were targeting. They're walking from the front door and spot the police. And one of the best transitions in movie history, we see a smile on Val Kilmer's face transform into a man firing an automatic weapon at his enemies. A few things to note about this scene. There's no drone shot, no helicopter shot, no massive wide crane shot, but you always manage to have a sense of geography in your mind's eye. You know who is shooting at whom, who gets the better of his enemies, and an overall sense of how the battle is going. For sound in a scene like this, it is industry standard to mix it in post-production, which is a fancy way of saying a sound artist will create the sounds you want in a studio after the movie has been filmed, and then you add that to the final picture. But Mann wanted ultra-realism, so what he did was he used the sound recorded in the actual streets of Los Angeles in the final film. The people who worked with him on the picture said he was out of his mind, but Mann understood that the loud, distorted, almost dystopian sound that comes from all that automatic gunfire is the best thing to put you in the driver's seat on the ride that we call heat. At some moments, it feels like the guns are going off right next to your head. Another fun fact, military personnel are actually made to watch a video of Val Kilmer's magazine change during this scene, and they're told by their instructors that 95% of them will not be able to handle a weapon as efficiently as this actor. As I said, people who are the best of the best at what they do. On to the coffee shop scene, or as they say where I come from, coffee shop scene. When you're filming a conversation, the basic setup is a wide shot, 2 over the shoulders, 1 across each actor. This will give us a mid shot across the table, and then we're going to have a close-up on each of the people that are talking. And this is how films have been made for about a century now. Here in Heat, overall, it's not too different. In this scene, though, there is no wide shot. We open with a straight over the shoulder on Vincent. Why? Because we don't care about the other people in the diner. We only care about Vincent and Neil. Even the location doesn't really matter that much. They have to meet somewhere, and a coffee shop is as good a place as any.
So maybe we can go out for coffee sometime.
All right, yeah. Maybe we could just get together and eat a bunch of caramels.
What do you mean?
When you think about it, it's as arbitrary as drinking coffee.
What the coffee shop setting does reinforce is that these 2 men are able to blend into the world of everyday people around them. And also, that had these met under different circumstances, a coffee catch-up might have been a regular occurrence. Not long after the scene starts, we move into close-ups, and this is more or less where we live for the remainder of the scene, because it's quite an intimate moment between these 2 men. Not intimate like they're going for a walk on the beach holding hands after the coffee, but intimate in a sense that they really understand each other. They recognize things about their own character in the other person. For better or worse, in this moment in their lives, they can actually be themselves. You'll also notice that Pacino, for the bulk of the scene, is leaning forward, even if it's ever so slightly, towards Robert De Niro, whereas De Niro spends the entire scene just laid back. This is where we see Vincent as the perpetual hunter of men like Neil, a man who always has the energy at full capacity even over coffee, even in a quite subdued and chilled setting. Neil, on the other hand, exudes confidence, the kind of quiet confidence that kings and CEOs would kill for, but he has no need to flex it. The simplicity of the setup here proves that for any scene in cinema, you do not need to overthink it. You need good writing, otherwise you're dead in the water. You need good actors, and you need competent visuals. But if you have those 3 ingredients, you can produce one of the most discussed about conversations in movie history. De Niro's body language and actions in this scene remind me a little bit of the great John Travolta in the movie Get Shorty when he says,
"What I'm thinking is, you're mine. I fucking own you. But what I'm not doing is feeling one way or another about it."
Next up, we have the hand. I know it sounds like a lot of fuss over a single gesture, but the greatest lesson my father ever taught me about movies was, show them, don't tell them. Film is a visual medium, and even though I love great writing, you need movies told with a strong visual language. Otherwise, they're simply not worth watching. Toward the end of the picture, Charlene, this is Chris's wife, has made a deal with police to give up her husband so she can stay out of jail and her son does not end up in some group home, which is exactly the kind of place that most of these characters were probably raised in. Chris is coming to meet Charlene. All she needs to do is stand on a balcony and wave him into the building. The police will arrest Chris, Charlene and her son will remain free. But when the moment comes, she can't do it. All she can do is this. This is one of the saddest and most tender moments in the entire film. Chris is a gambling addict. He's an alcoholic. Their home life is hardly peaceful or stable. Charlene has been having an affair with another man for much of the film. The last thing she wants to do is go to prison, and even more importantly, she does not want to destroy her son's life before it even begins. But, even with all of that said, she still cannot bring herself to betray her husband. It's moments like this that give me hope and also reinforce what a genius Michael Mann is as a director. From one gesture, you understand the full depth of love between Chris and Charlene. No dialogue, no explanation, just a hand. Show them, don't tell them. This brings us to the ending on the runway at the Los Angeles airport. And the ending of the movie Heat felt almost inevitable from the moment Vincent and Neil finished their cup of coffee. Once both men acknowledged that they would not hesitate to put the other down, it was kind of like Chekhov's gun, or in this case, Chekhov's face-off. The samurai level of discipline and obsession that defines both these men meant that at some point they would have to have a final showdown, like at the end of a great cowboy picture, only now we're at the Los Angeles airport. After the final shootout, there's perhaps the most heartbreaking moment in the entire picture. Vincent has got the better of Neil, who's now on his way to meet his maker. In a final gesture of some strange and profound brotherhood, Neil holds out his hand for Vincent, and Vincent holds Neil's hand as his life leaves his body. Neil does not give any large speeches. He simply says to Vincent, "I told you I'm never going back." A direct callback to their coffee shop conversation when Neil told Vincent he would never return to prison. All Vincent does is agree, and he holds the hand of perhaps the only person in the entire world who truly understood him, a man who he just shot and killed as Neil goes on to meet his ancestors. I remember the first time I saw this movie as a kid, and boy did I cry. A lot. Even at the ripe old age of 12, I did not particularly like or identify with either of these men. But they were men of excellence, and they respected each other, and they both knew exactly the life they'd signed up for. And they also both knew that death, and specifically a death like this, was not only possible, but somewhat likely. Mann films this entire sequence like a painting. Two figures, darkness, a runway, the lights of Los Angeles in the distance, and the same cold, indifferent city that swallowed both of them whole. It's a perfect ending to a perfect film. So we started this video with a question. Why is a movie that's over 30 years old still at the top of so many people's must-watch list? But before we give the answer, let's talk about what Heat left behind, because the footprint of this film on cinema, on culture, and even the real world is larger than most people realize. Before Heat, there was LA Takedown. Now, in 1989, Michael Mann made a TV movie, the same story, same character, same coffee shop scene, same downtown shootout, Neil McCauley, Vincent Hanna, in Los Angeles. It was called LA Takedown. Now, LA Takedown is not a bad film, but it is a film made with the limitations of a TV budget and also a TV schedule. And Michael Mann knew this all too well. He also knew that this particular story was far bigger than what he managed to do with LA Takedown. So he did something that almost never happens in Hollywood. He got to make the movie again. This time with Robert De Niro, with Al Pacino, with Dante Spinotti, and with a budget that matched the ambition of the story he'd been carrying around in his head for 15 years. Most directors never get a second chance at their best idea, but Mann got his, and he did not waste a single frame of it. LA Takedown is fascinating to watch alongside Heat, not because it's better, it isn't, but because you can see the bones of greatness waiting to be built properly, like watching the blueprint before the building goes up. Mann understood something that most filmmakers never got the opportunity to prove, that a great story told with the right resources and the right cast is a completely different animal than the same story told without them. And Heat is the proof of that thesis. Now let's touch on what Heat actually changed. The downtown LA shootout rewrote the rulebook for action filmmaking. Before Heat, action sequences were largely a spectacle. We had big explosions, we had dramatic music, we had slow motion heroics, but Heat showed filmmakers that realism was more terrifying than spectacle, that real tactics, real sound, real geography could put an audience inside a scene in a way that no amount of slow motion could achieve. The influence of that sequence is everywhere. Christopher Nolan has spoken at length about his admiration for Heat, specifically how Mann used Los Angeles as a living, breathing character. And when you watch The Dark Knight, it's impossible not to see that influence. Nolan wanted Gotham to be in his film what LA was to Heat. The DNA is unmistakable. Denis Villeneuve's Sicario, also one of my favorite films, Nicholas winning Redfern's Drive, another really great picture. The tactical realism that runs through both of these films traces a direct line back to Michael Mann and Spinotti on the streets of downtown Los Angeles in 1995. And it goes beyond cinema. The video game franchise Payday, an entire game built around the concept of professional crew-based heists, is explicitly modeled on Heat. The developers have said so publicly. Grand Theft Auto, Kanye Lynch, a generation of game designers grew up watching Heat and building entire worlds from it. Even more remarkably, the downtown LA shootout has been studied by actual law enforcement agencies as a case study in criminal tactics, a Hollywood film used to train real police officers. Mann's obsession with authenticity came full circle. And then there's Val Kilmer. God rest his soul. Val Kilmer gave one of the great supporting performances in cinema history in Heat, and for a long time, in the way that Hollywood has been so cruel to talent that burns too bright and too fast, he didn't really get the credit he deserved for it. But in his final years of life, something shifted. People started coming back to Heat, coming back to Tombstone, and also coming back to The Doors. And all of a sudden, people in mass realized that Val Kilmer was one of the most gifted actors of his generation, a man who could disappear completely into a character in a way very few actors ever managed to accomplish. The magazine change on his weapon alone would have been enough to secure his legacy in the world of cinema. But watch every scene he shares with De Niro in Heat. Watch how he listens. Watch how he reacts. That is a masterclass in screen acting from a man who never quite got the flowers he deserved while he was alive. But he sure does get them now. And then there's Heat 2. Now in 2022, Michael Mann co-wrote a novel continuing the story of Heat, set both before and after the events of the original film. Neil's crew before Los Angeles, Vincent Hanna after the runway. The fact that Mann returned to this world 27 years later tells you everything you need to know about what Heat meant to him personally. And this wasn't just a cash grab. This is a man who never truly left Los Angeles, who never truly left Neil and Vincent. There are discussions being had at the moment about a film adaptation. Now, whether this happens or not, the fact that the story continues means that Heat is still not finished yet. It's alive, it's still growing, it's still finding new audiences some 30 years after it was first released. So, back to our original question. Why does Heat still tower over everything 30 years later? It's not the action sequences, though they are extraordinary. It's not the cast, though it may be the greatest ensemble ever assembled for a single picture. But it's not the coffee shop scene either, even though it remains one of the greatest scenes in cinema history. It's because Heat was made with complete and total commitment to excellence. Every department, every frame, every performance, every sound, every choice Michael Mann, Spinotti, De Niro, and Pacino, and every other person who worked on that set and in post-production made was in service of telling a story as truthfully and powerfully as humanly possible. And audiences feel that. Maybe they can't articulate it, maybe they don't know why they watch it every couple of years, maybe they just know that when Neil turns that car wheel, they feel something they can't explain. But what they are feeling is craft, commitment, and care. As I mentioned before, my dad, who was a director and an editor, and who really taught me to love and appreciate film as a young kid, he would say about a movie like Heat, this was a movie that was made with care. And Heat is a movie that was made with absolute care. And that, 30 years later, is why it still sits at the top of so many coveted lists in terms of film lovers and cinema history alike. I'm Eddie P. Remember, show, don't tell. I will see you all next time.